Oh, you do.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Anthony. How are you?
There was a second there
On
I
this
thought,
fine.
oh no, technical issue. He can't hear me.
I was gonna do this one and pretend to freeze. I thought it would be funny. I the Speaking of funny, went to the grocery store yesterday, Anthony. Pretty cool because the cashier checked me out.
Uh, well, it's
It's
apropos.
great.
We're talking about yogurt today, so
Yeah. Anthony, what happens when intelligence becomes your team's greatest weakness? In 1996, a catastrophic expedition on Mount Everest led to the deaths of 8 climbers. The tragedy wasn't caused by lack of expertise. The team included some of the world's most accomplished mountaineers. Instead, it was a culture of deference to authority and fear of speaking up that proved fatal. This disaster fundamentally changed how climbing teams approach leadership and communication. Always a great idea for us to start up the episode with 7 people dying.
with death,
Like it really,
yeah,
yeah,
well, it
really
was Chris.
brings
It
the
was it was
vibes.
eight. It was 8 people. You
8 people.
unless
Well,
one of
there
them
you
didn't
go.
matter to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that one person that died was, yeah, just didn't realize. Today on How to Founder Anthony, we will be talking about creating positive workplace cultures. I am Chris Franks. Today with me is my bespectacled co-host. You always get compliments by your glasses, so your handsomely bespectable co-host, Mr. Anthony
Four ninety
Franco.
five Amazon reading glasses.
And we're joined today by Christian Espinosa. I'm a little pissed off about Christian, and I'll explain why. He isn't your typical CEO. He's summited the highest peaks on multiple continents, completed 24 Ironman triathlons, and built a cybersecurity empire. But his greatest achievement question mark is learning that being the smartest person in the room is often the biggest obstacle to success. Christian, I could tell you Anthony and I have never been accused of being the smartest people in the room. And so we've got that going for us as well. But Christian, the reason why I'm pissed at you is I used to be the person on the show who's done the most Ironmans, and you quadrupled me, man. 24. That's unfreaking believable. We're going to make Anthony really uncomfortable by talking about chafing later on, which is going to be really fun.
At
Chris,
least you're not going to be talking about bloody nipples.
that's
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 part of it.
yeah, I was going to say that's a subset of chafing, but that's kind of bullet point number one under the chafe. All right, so let's just get started. Christian, tell us a little bit. Like you've got such an amazing and interesting backstory. How does this play into your philosophy and thoughts? How does wilderness survival, outdoor summiting, Ironman, how does this play into your thoughts about how you build teams and how you build a resilient work culture?
I think all these things tie together for me. I like to do things that force me to become more resilient and more resourceful, which, Ironman, you have to dig deep sometimes and find the resources, and you have to be resilient when things aren't going well, and things often don't go well, especially if you do 24 of them. I've been on the side of the road throwing up and been in a lot of different scenarios. But I think it's important if you're going to build a company to have that resilience and that resourcefulness. And then if you're building a team, it's also important to have that because things aren't always going to go as well as you think they are. And for me, going through different experiences with different types of teams, climbing mountains, outdoor wilderness survival, it's all about just continuously learning and how to select the right people for the right positions and how to create the right culture. So people, as you mentioned earlier in that story about Everest, people actually speak up if they feel the conditions are not right. It's important that everyone contributes to the team, not just the leader of the team.
I think you said a couple of different things, but I want to hone in on one theme here, which is the idea of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And what we kind of hinted at it in the open, but really creating a learning culture and a culture where it's okay to speak up and disagree and have conflict and have this sense that, yeah, we want to be resilient, but resilience oftentimes means it's okay for us to disagree. Anthony, in your experience, have you had cultures, have you been able to build cultures where you really felt like you were able to build a learning culture within companies?
Yeah, I mean, so culture is something you can either be purposeful. Culture happens whether or not you're purposeful about it. Mm-hmm. And so have I built cultures? Yes. Have they all been purposeful? No.
I've built cultures. That is true. Have I built cultures?
But I think one thing is for sure, if you're not purposeful about it, it's gonna wind up not being what you want, right? It's gonna be something that and there's all kinds of different tactics. I'd love Christian for you to weigh in on this. So I know founders that really lean into like hiring veterans, because that they basically have already been pre-trained, right, in the culture that they want to establish for the company. I've also met a lot of founders that say or investors that say we only invest in folks, or we only hire folks that are high performance athletes that do Ironmans and ultra marathons, trying to like wrap a correlation around an experience. Does that mindset work, or is that something that does it work? Does that methodology work to build a culture within an organization?
I think it can work. I mean, I'm a veteran. I used to be an athlete. I mean, as far as team sports in high school and college and stuff. So I think there are some values with that, but also not every veteran has the same values. Not every athlete has the same values. And it depends on the sport. You know, some sports are less team sports than other sports, but I think it just depends on your experience. I don't think it can be, I guess, made that simple. For me, I established my core values because in my first company, I realized the problems I had were because people didn't share my values in my company from a cultural perspective. And I used to think core values were a bunch of garbage. Like people say integrity and service before self, and all that's fine, but those are like givens. Those are not really values.
Yeah, that's the price of admission, man. Like we said that before. Like if you don't have integrity, like why are we even here?
I shouldn't
have to tell you to have integrity as a value of my company, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or treat people nicely with respect, you know.
Our core value for guests on this podcast is they have to be breathing.
Super high bar. Super high bar.
Yeah, so I looked at my core values and where the problems were in my first company and the friction points I had with certain people on my team. And I established the core values. And then after that, I hired people based on core value alignment and based on cultural fit. Used to be, I would hire people based on their certification, their degree, their technical background. And I realized that didn't matter as much as the core values and the aptitude and attitude. Mm-hmm. And then I had to get rid of a lot of people. I started evaluating people based on core value alignment with my organization's core values, which I established. And like you mentioned, culture will establish itself if you don't, as a leader, establish it. And part of that is also enforcing it. And you have to create a culture where everyone enforces that culture. So if one of my core values is taking ownership, for instance, and somebody's blaming the circumstance of like why their computer's not working and not trying to fix it themselves, as example, that's somebody else on my team should be able to call them out on it. If my core value is listen carefully and respond clearly, and somebody is not listening, then it's fine for the rest of my team to say, "Hey, look, I noticed that meeting you weren't listening. You were just kind of like interrupting the whole time and not really understanding the person's point of view."
Is that a core value? Listen carefully, respond clearly?
Yes, that's one of my core values.
I mean, Anthony has never listened carefully to me once, and he certainly does not respond clearly.
Is that one of your core values, though?
One of my core values is to listen only to those things that are important.
Touche, Anthony. Touche. You, Christian, you hit two different points here, and I want to get into the weeds a little bit on this because you hit the idea that, first of all, you have to establish your core values. And to your point, a lot of times people will be like, oh, yeah, we've got core values. It's great. We did it in our deck when we first started the company, our investor deck. And it's like, and so establishing those core values becomes really important. I want to ask you how you do that. But then the next question is not only how do you establish them, how do you then make sure that everybody else adopts them in the same way? I think that there's tends to be this gap between, hey, we've created core values and we're living by our core values. We're using that to drive our actual culture.
Yeah, I had to really do a lot of reflection. I realized that I wrote a book about this in my first company that 99.9% of the problems in my company were because of emotional intelligence from my staff. They didn't have the emotional intelligence. I work in cybersecurity, so everyone's like super rationally intelligent, but they often lack emotional intelligence. So that was part of it. And then it was also the core value alignment. So I realized when I find myself frustrated with somebody on my team, and it was like this continuous frustration. I'm like, why is this frustration here? And it was like, okay, this person is only complaining about the situation versus finding an opportunity in it, for instance. And for me, I find an opportunity in every situation. So that's one of my core values. If we find an opportunity in a situation, a lot of people don't do that. So if they just find the problems over and over and over, then I realize, okay, this person is probably not good for my team because they're just going to frustrate me and they're going to bring the rest of the team down. You know, it's a matter of like, also, can I train this person? And the answer is typically no, because people often are resistant to changing what they perceive as their identity, which is why I had to let people go. So it's a matter of like hiring people for that. And then on a quarterly basis, and on a daily basis really, but like a quarterly officially is what we did. And what we do now is like evaluate on these 7 core values, which we have, how are they doing on those values? Just like you'd evaluate them on any performance. And if the evaluation is not good, come up with a plan to fix it. Otherwise, the culture is just going to start drifting, and then you're going to be more frustrated.
I want to ask you both this question because this is the classic thing that comes up. And it's the brilliant jerk fallacy, which is like, okay, I get that, but I have this one person who writes the most beautiful, best code and is way more productive than everybody. Sure. This person doesn't shower and is an asshole to everybody else around them. Does not, creates a toxic work environment. We've had several complaints about them, but they're so brilliant, right? It tends to be something that it just comes up almost every single company that I've ever been in or around. There's usually one person, maybe 2 in the company that fits this mold. Christian, what do you do?
Get rid of them as soon as possible.
Anthony,
because your team is looking at you on how you enforce the culture. And if you allow someone in your environment that doesn't meet the values, but you expect everybody up to hold those values, it's incongruent, and it means you're a shitty leader because you can't make decisions to get rid of somebody. And the bottom line is that person's replaceable. And I've had this scenario over and over and over because I work in cybersecurity, and there's plenty of people that are big ego, think they're smarter than everybody else. And they think they don't have to get along with anybody, and they think the value they bring allows them to be an asshole. And I've had to get rid of them. And I had talks with some people and say, look, one guy specifically wanted to become a leader in my company. And I said, this is kind of like the values you embrace. This is where you need to go. And you can't be a leader unless you're going to bridge that gap. And he got pissed off and said, so you're asking me to change who I am? I said, absolutely, because who you are is not the right person for this position. So if you're not willing to change, then your time is limited here. And he quit a couple days later.
Anthony, agree?
It's an interesting problem because one of my core values is you meet people where they're at. And I think there's a fine line between, like when you talk about brilliant ass, right? Ass is a perspective. And And so there's this whole notion of being toxic that may not line up with what really is going on for that individual. Maybe they're misunderstood, or maybe people he or she rubs at the team the wrong way, for not because they're a jerk, but because they're just misunderstood. And there's this trigger for me, and that is when they think of self before the team always.
Mm-hmm. That's the intentionality behind the behavior.
Yeah, exactly right. So you have to kind of, I've done this. I've fired great salespeople because they were really toxic. And when I mean toxic, it's not that they, salespeople have egos. Great coders have egos, and those egos can be properly navigated and properly pointed. But if they're always thinking about what's in it for me, that's the time when you have to move on. When they're just perceived as jerks, maybe it's a team conversation and a conversation with that individual to see if you can navigate them into a more healthy relationship with the rest of the team.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. That, like, for me, I look at the intentionality behind the behavior, and if it is purely selfish, and it's not just like they are unaware. I mean, you can fix some unawareness, but you can't fix the innate, it's just me, what's in it for me behavior often.
Yes, 100% agree.
It's the research shows that there's a thing called managerial derailment, and 50% of people don't reach their intended targets in their career. And one of the primary pieces of that are flaws or blind spots. Now, flaws and blind spots, if you pull them apart, a flaw is something, it's kind of structural, but a blind spot is just something where people don't know that that's the way they're showing up. So, Christian, in this environment, let's continue on the tact around the person is a little bit toxic. Mm-hmm. How can you bring those blind spots into vision so that people can react on that? How do you coach people to start to say, hey, look, we're building a high-performing team here. We want our team to be excellent. We want you to be on board, but this is actually something I'm seeing.
So I did, and I still do a lot of training for my team. I think it's hard for people just to bridge that gap without that awareness. And most people have those blind spots. They're unaware. Like, I think all of us have blind spots in some portion of our life. So I've done a lot of training in my organization where a lot of it is neurolinguistic programming based. Part of it is awareness. Part of it's those blind spots. Part of it's the program we automatically run. Part of it's like, not everyone shares the same model of the world as you. So you have to realize when you're communicating with somebody else, they see the world through a different lens, which means you may have to alter how you communicate for them to understand what you're saying. And that's a big thing in my organization and in cybersecurity, because if our clients don't understand what we're saying, they're not going to be able to fix the issues we identify. And it's traditional in cybersecurity just to talk over someone's head, because that makes you feel significant and smart because the other person doesn't understand you. It's this weird human dynamic. So a lot of it is...
they won't ask questions either.
Won't ask questions, yeah. Because they know the answers are not going to be relevant. It's going to be another over-their-head answer.
Yep.
So a lot of it is training, and not everyone is going to be in. Some people don't want to change what they perceive as their identity for growth. They want to maintain their identity because ego wants to protect our identity to some degree. So in my organization, I've done a lot of training to try to fix those blind spots, to try to fix how we communicate, but not everybody will be on board, and that's just something you have to come to terms with. And that's been very hard for me because one of my core values is ownership. And I feel like, why can't I help this person move forward? Why can't I communicate to them about their blind spots? Why can't I make them understand, like, they're really good here, but they're pissing people off here? And I have to just step back at some point and say, I've done my best. I can't bring, if they're not willing to come 50% at least the way, I can't pull them 100% of the way.
And Anthony, this is really true. Oftentimes when people, you're early stage and you bring on an employee and they take a risk and they take less money than you want, then maybe they could get other places. And you feel a sense of obligation to this employee because they worked early on, but they just aren't evolving with that? Anthony, have you had that experience, and how do you approach it?
So every single person that I've hired, I always feel an obligation to them because they've chosen to work with me instead of somebody else. Right. So that regardless of what you perceive they've sacrificed, they're gaining something also on the other end. Maybe they get some stock, or they get a better work culture, or there's always an exchange that people are making when they just choose to hire you. But there is this notion of obligation to them when they come on. But that obligation doesn't just stop at, look, if somebody's not happy working with you and working for the company, or they're not successful, it's actually compassionate to help them move on.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I mean help them move on, it's not just like letting them go, but it's also like let's help together. Let's help you find a spot that's better for you, because this isn't it.
Christian, react to that. I mean, I think it's wise. Have you done something similar?
Yeah, it really resonated with me what Anthony said, because I've had people join my company now in the early stages where I wasn't able to pay them a lot. And I felt this immense sense of like making sure they're taken care of and trying to help them grow with the company, and this obligation to them. And I had one individual that, was really narcissistic and kind of undermining things at some point. And I had a hard time letting him go. I had to like really have a number of instances like hit me in the face where I'm like, but why am I still holding on this person? But it was like this inner conflict. Like, I owe this person because they came on early and I didn't pay them as much, but now they're making a lot of money. And it was like this inner dilemma I had. And I eventually had to let the person go, because one bad apple can spoil the rest of the culture. And everyone is looking at me like, we see what's going on here. Why aren't you doing something about it, Christian? And it was really a big struggle, because I take it seriously. When somebody comes on and works for me, I realize they do have an option to work for someone else. But I also had to reconcile, like, I spent 8 months of my time, my personal time, training this person on how to do sales, how to do marketing, how to like articulate a value proposition. So that this wasn't just a one-way street. That person left my organization way better skilled than they ever were before they came in. And a lot of people, I have to also reconcile this with me, a lot of people would have paid me for that training that I gave this person, for free, basically, and paid them at the same time. I had to like rationalize all this with myself in order to make the decision, to like let them go, which is, it still wasn't an easy decision. But after I made the decision, everything was just like, it was like an exhale, and like all the tension went away. My team started working better. The gaps were filled much faster, and now we're scaling much faster. Yes.
There's an inherent paradox here that I want to get both of your takes on, which is, for me to create a good culture, it means I need to create a relationship with my team. The first thing I need to do is make sure that they feel psychologically safe. They know who I am. They know what I expect, et cetera. And in that process, I'm going to get to know them. Hopefully, I'm going to get to know what they want, their goals, their families, what they want to achieve. That creates a bond, and that's a really important part of culture. But also, you are a person who knows and respects this individual. But as the person that leads the organization, you are the steward of the culture. And sometimes those two things can feel like they're in conflict. Christian, true or not true? And then Anthony, react.
I think there's some truth to that. I like to know my team. I have one-on-ones with everyone on my team periodically, so I understand where they are, what their goals are, and want to make sure I'm putting them in the right seats, and to align them with their goals and helping them take the right steps in my organization. So I don't want to put somebody in a position that is not a good fit for them, and then later on they tell me they're quitting. I want to make sure I understand what they want to do early on. But yeah, I mean, even if someone wants to do certain things in my company and they're not ready, I can't just put them in that position because I think they should, because they want to be in that position. I have to enforce the culture as well as a leader. And that also comes from myself. I mean, leadership starts with self-leadership. So if I'm not doing the things I say are part of the culture myself, I sure as hell can't expect anybody else to do it.
Anthony, what do you think?
I'm thinking of a time where I had to make a really hard decision where it was a 5-on-1. So I had 5 people complaining about one individual. And they just, he's no good. He's toxic. He's like, he's this, he's that. And I spent weeks thinking about what I needed to do about it. What I ultimately wound up doing is getting rid of the 5.
Oh,
Because,
really? Interesting.
yeah,
They were the
because
cultural problem.
they were the cultural problem. And it was, I was like, I don't want cliques to be able to mandate who, and the individual they're complaining about was a good dude. Like he really cared about the company, about his teammates. He was a little quirky, a little eccentric, but just his intent, to Christian's point, his intentions were amazing. Yeah. So the reason why I bring this up is because fundamentally culture is your responsibility, and you can't do it by consensus. You can do it with collaboration, but you can't do it by consensus because it gets away from you. It was a hard decision, right? It was hard to tell them either you deal with this individual on an honest basis or you're gone, and they all wind up leaving. So, yeah, you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of people naturally get rid of the one individual versus the 5. But I think it's about that intentionality. And I used to do a lot of Department of Defense work where, they have these government contracts. You would hire like one person that was really good and a bunch of people that didn't know what they're doing just to fill the seats. And often all those people that didn't know what they're doing complained about the one person because they were making them, it's like tall poppy syndrome. They didn't, they want to chop down the tall poppy, right?
Right. Yeah.
So who do you get rid of? Like the one person that's doing great, or these people that are complaining about in filling the position? Yeah, you have to really look at the intentionality behind it for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into the tactics here. What are some of the steps that you do? So we've talked about core values. We've talked about some of the challenges about just how to frame this problem up. You've talked about how you use training to help bring people's awareness and level up people's skill set. What are some other tools, techniques that you can recommend for us as founders just to build a great culture?
I think it's important to articulate on a routine basis your core values. Like I have monthly meetings with my entire organization, and I go over the core values in those monthly meetings. So it's not like it was a one and done. It's it's a refresher if people have forgotten about them. So I think that's important. And I think it's important when I have meetings and when I'm interacting with my team, that if there's an opportunity to articulate one of the core values, or there's a situation where the core value wasn't handled very well, I think it's important to bring it up and discuss it openly. I mean, I'm not one just to say I know all the answers. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what the exact perspective or situation was sometimes. So I will have an open discussion, and hopefully from that discussion, it'll be more of a facilitated discussion. But hopefully from there'll be a learning moment, because I feel like one of my core values is really a growth mindset. To grow beyond your comfort zone. So I try to embrace that and think, okay, what is the thing we can learn from this? And everyone contributes, and we all get better. I've had one individual in the past that didn't want to learn from anything, and I let him go. He was like, I did the best I could do. There's no point in discussing it. I'm like, okay, so you couldn't have done, how are we going to get better next time? So I had to let him go. But it was there for a while.
Definition of fixed mindset, by the way. Like, no, I tried hard. Like growth mindset. It's like
I crushed it.
I'm like, did you read my first book? He's like, oh yeah, I read it. I'm like, okay, apparently not, because I talked explicitly about this topic.
This exact topic, right?
Yeah.
If you read it, you don't remember it. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a matter of just having those moments where you discuss these things openly, and if someone is not embracing the core values, it'll come out for me, and then you have to navigate that.
There's a stat here in our notes that says 72% of executives cite culture as more critical to performance than strategy. to or operating model. Like it just, and famously, culture eats strategy for breakfast, for purpose powers both. Yeah, Bob Johansson says that. Like those things I think are truisms in this world, which is you do it. But I think your point, what you're saying tactically, Christian, is that you can't assume that everybody knows and internalizes those core values like you do, and even maybe you, the people that work directly for you, that you need to continue to drive that through the organization. Anthony, how did you do that? How did you continue to revisit your core values and just talk about them again and again and again?
Yeah, I wish I could say I was more methodical about it, like Christian was. We would towards the end of my large, so Effective was 100 plus employees, and just before we exited, we started to recognize we're losing control of our values, and we started going, all right, let's do the things that Christian's doing now at a smaller company, which is incorporate those core values in hiring questions, right? Mm-hmm. Like really put it at the forefront. Like, how do we interview for curiosity? And then also, like Christian did, started to incorporate it in quarterly and annual feedback, and even doing things like we started doing things like putting a bonus plan structured around those core values. So truly making it worth people's while to think about those things all the time. How am I modeling this core value?
Hey, I've got a question for you both because it's just something that's been burning in the back of my head. I learned recently that Jensen, who, he'll join us on one of these podcast episodes at some. Jensen's from NVIDIA. He famously praises in public and scolds in public. And so, conventional wisdom says you praise in public and then you scold in private, or you coach, or whatever else you want to say. And his point there is, hey, I hire for core values, and these core values is that we are completely transparent as an organization, and that we are all aligned on what it is we're trying to do. And if I don't do that, I'm actually hurting the team and the culture. Christian, I just want to get your take. I've been wanting to ask that question because it's such an interesting way to approach it, and it's hard to argue that NVIDIA is pretty good company. They've had pretty good results.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that tactic. Maybe at NVIDIA it works, but from my experience, people don't like to be punished or scolded in public. That typically doesn't work. And maybe he's been able to establish a culture where that's okay, but I have a feeling if you ask all those people, behind closed doors, they'd be like, yeah, I didn't appreciate that. Because
I also learned a couple days after that he has like 70 something millionaires in the company. Like, no, I think it's more. I think it's like over 100 million. So it's like,
and I guess if you're making that kind of money and you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't really care. He can yell at me in public, but I'm rolling into millions of dollars because my stock
that's
is
exactly
worth
right.
so
My
much.
stock options, I just got to hang on to make sure when they mature.
Right. That's a different audience for the scold in public versus a startup where people are making 100K a year or something. It's very different. So you have to consider that too.
Yeah, I think it's true. I don't think it works unless you have just explicitly built a culture where that happens. Famously, Ray Dalio wrote Principles, or excuse me, his book is, it's not Principles, anyway, he talks about every bit of his culture. Like, if you don't show up for a meeting, every person ranks every person's performance at every single meeting they show up. He tries to create a true meritocracy. And it's like, that sounds like a freaking nightmare to me. Like, it sounds like Big Brother watching, but it worked for his company. Also, he runs, at least at one point, the most valuable hedge fund in the world. So probably.
Yeah, I don't think there's one solution. It's like whatever works for you and your organization and whatever you're comfortable with as a leader. Everyone's got their, Ray Dalio, and everyone's got their own idea. And we get trapped in thinking, oh, this is the blueprint, so I should just do that blueprint. But that blueprint, you may be able to take some things from it, but it may not be 100% applicable to you or your organization or what you're trying to accomplish.
It's such a good point, and I'll finish the questions on this and we can move into the speed round, Christian, which is part of what you just said is so critically important, but it requires, and you mentioned it earlier, I just wanted to press on it. It requires founders to have a level of self-awareness that oftentimes we don't. Oftentimes when we show up, we have a hard time articulating our values. We have a hard time saying, this is the sort of culture and company I want to build. How did you do that? What was the journey you went through?
I did a lot of work. I went to a lot of personal development events. I've had a lot of coaching. I've had to do a lot of reflection. So when things don't go right, I reflect and I figure out, okay, what was my role in this and how can I improve it for next time? I'm a big fan of Kaizen, which is continuous and never-ending improvement. In order to practice Kaizen, you have to get to the root cause so you know what to improve. And I'm also a big proponent that the business is a mirror of me. If the business isn't growing, it's because I am holding it back. I'm the one responsible. So the world effectively is a mirror of who you are, right? So but I had to do the work to get to that point. So I've done a lot of the work, a lot of the deep work, neurolinguistic programming, coaching, going to seminars, uncomfortable work to get to the point where I have that awareness. And it's something, you never fully master, but it's something I'm very passionate about.
It's such a great point, and it's the thing that I think early stage founders, Anthony, we miss so much of the time. Look, I'm an awesome coder, or I'm awesome go to market person. Yeah, but we gotta have you as an awesome human being for you to be an awesome founder. Like, and it's super hard to even talk about that in these settings, right, Anthony?
Yeah, so I've been reflecting on this praise in public, scold in public, and I think it starts with yourself. Like to your point, it's like, hey guys, I screwed up here. And I do that a lot, where it's like I could have handled that better, or I'm making this decision in the dark. I hope it doesn't, like, just being really candid about what your thought process is. The scold in public thing is really interesting. I didn't know that story, and I'm thinking that takes us an incredible amount of courage for him to do that. And that doesn't, and courage may not seem like the right word, but it is the right word. It is counterintuitive, and maybe it does foster true transparency. And also, like, when you screw up, it's not career ending. Like, hey, when you're scolding somebody in public, scold is probably not the right word, but you highlight a place where somebody didn't didn't live up to our culture, or didn't meet metrics they promised. Like, maybe it's like, hey, this person didn't do it, and look, they're okay. Like, we're not firing them, right? Like, maybe it instills this notion of safety, in that you can fail here and still succeed in your career here. It's rewired something in my brain just now when I heard that.
Also, he in a public setting, everybody knew that the chip that they built was a disaster. Like, it was publicly knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And he stood up and was like, guys, that doesn't meet our criteria. That's a disaster of a product. And, like, we collectively need to learn about it. I don't know if that's true, school. Christian, what do you think?
I think it depends on how it's done. I mean, if you're calling out the individual as, like, John is an idiot because he didn't do this properly, that's not effective.
No, that doesn't work. Yeah,
but if
that's
you say
exactly what Anthony does to me.
This is a decision John made, or this is what resulted. Let's figure out collectively how to resolve it. I think that's a different approach. And I have no problem admitting in my meetings that when I've screwed things up, or that I could have done it better. I have no problem doing that. Like, that's different. Admitting something than talking about somebody else's behavior. But I always talk about the behavior. I don't talk about the individual as being a bad person. I'm like, okay, this is what was said by Rick in a meeting. How do we think we can improve that? Or what do you think, Rick? I don't scold the individual. It's more the behavior. And I don't like that word scold either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
don't
just,
like
and
it.
you coach, but the idea is that in both of those settings, what you're talking about, Christian, is you're focusing on the outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
not the intent, not the human beings, not them. You're like, hey, look, whatever we did here, was bad and didn't meet our criteria.
And it's got to be productive.
Yeah.
You can't scold Chris for not being able to grow hair, right?
I mean, he does, Christian. It's just
he's got some facial hair going on though.
I say that, yeah, I'm bald, but I also have a bad beard. So I got that going for me too.
There you go.
All right, Anthony, I need your help. Let's go into this speed round. Can you run the Kristen, could you give us feedback on our graphic? How did that make you feel?
It was very speedy.
Yeah, it's very speedy is right.
It was. Yeah.
All right. So anonymous feedback systems or direct confrontation, more the 360s, or is it like, look, I need to sit down with you and talk to you?
I prefer to sit down and talk with me.
So this is actually a little bit of an interesting and more complex question. Hire for cultural fit or raw talent that you believe could be a cultural fit?
Raw talent that I can believe is a cultural fit.
I like it. Regular team buildings or organic building? Do we do, escape rooms, or are you just doing this as part of the day-to-day?
I think it's important to schedule regular team building activities.
Written values in the sense that you continually put them on documents, put them on the wall, et cetera, or you just talk about them regularly?
They're written down, but we also talk about them.
And then can you build a good culture in a remote first environment, or do you have to have people in the office to build a good culture?
We can build it in a remote environment. My team is remote.
That's good. I didn't know. We didn't set you up. That was a softball for you. Like, no, we got this. It's pretty great.
We got it.
All right, Anthony, what did you learn from today's episode?
So I wrote a few down. First of all, the obvious ones: establish core values and hire based on alignment to those. Mm-hmm. Evaluate on those core values during quarterly reviews and to avoid cultural drift. Continue to reinforce those core values over and over and over again. And then most importantly, you as the leader have to live up to your core values like you're the model.
Some really good points, deep dive recommendations. I've read most of these, and then Christian, I want you to talk about your books too. The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, very good book. Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I think it gets a little bit misused, but it's a terrific book. And then Amy Edmondson is the person who created the concept of growth mindset. She talks about the Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson and the $1 Trillion Coach by Eric Schmidt. And there's a few other co-authors on that. Christian, incredible conversation. Where can we get your books? I can't believe I haven't read them. You said you have 2. Where can I find them?
They're on Amazon.com. They're also on Audible. I had Callio Griffith narrate them. He did Trump's Art of the Deal and a couple Tim Ferriss books. Yeah, they're
I'm available for voiceovers too, Christian, for your next book.
Okay, well, I'm almost done with my next one. So
yeah, just like I've got okay. Anyway, right.
I didn't know that. All right,
plenty of availability. Yeah,
I'll keep it in mind.
Yeah. So tell me the name of the books.
The first one I wrote is called The Smartest Person in the Room. It's really about dissolving your ego and becoming a better human being and embracing that emotional intelligence. A lot of things we talked about. The second book is called The In-Between Life in the Micro. It's about balancing, chasing big goals with the micro moments that are right in front of you. Because for me, I've put blinders on and ignored things right in front of me and justified it by going after this big goal. And, relationships have fallen apart and other things have crumbled because I didn't pay attention.
Like you're literally talking about every person that's done an endurance athlete, like, hey, I'm going to go out and ride for 7 hours today because I've got to do that. And it's like, yeah, and your kids want to go to the park. Like, oh, well, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, well, I was doing that, building a business, climbing mountains. So it was like times 10.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you're a high achiever, but sometimes you miss those opportunities to go to coffee with people. Really, really excellent conversation, Christian. Where can we find out more? Where would you like us to connect? We'll buy your books, but where else?
Yeah, my personal brand website, christianespinosa.com. My company is bluegoatcyber.com also. Either one of those places. And I'm on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best social media place. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. And I think that's about it.
I mean, pretty incredible. Do you have any other mountains or big endurance races coming up?
I took some time off. So I just started running not too long ago. So I'm up to about a 5K. But I took about 6 months off and focused purely on my business. So I'm getting back into it. I might throw a race on the calendar. And I live right by Tippytown Lake, and I see all these dead fish though. But I know that Ironman Arizona is like literally right here.
I mean,
I'm
out your
like
front door, you could probably just, walk out. You wouldn't
I
even
can.
have
I
to
can
go.
walk over to the transition and set up my bike and
Yeah.
everything. But the lake, I don't know. I've got some mixed feelings about the lake. But that might be
I
my
told
next
you my
one.
funny story. If anybody ever wants to hear my funny story about swimming in Tippytown Lake, reach out on LinkedIn, but it is not safe for this podcast. I'll tell you
It's
that
not
much.
worth it. It's not.
Yeah.
The story's not worth it.
Anthony, what do we have coming up?
We're gonna try to plug through. I think we've had multiple podcast episodes on this, and I don't think we have a good answer yet. But we're going to talk about digital marketing, and we're going to talk about making money through digital marketing. I think it's going to be the existential topic that we never get a good answer on. But hopefully Aaron will give us some good insight. So we're talking about digital marketing with guest Aaron Figueroa. For those of you that are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to go to howtofounder.com and follow us on wherever your favorite podcast episodes are. We're there. Howtofounder.com. Christian, thank you so much. Chris, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.